Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me. I am thrilled to announce my 2017 nonfiction TBR. I put a lot of effort and thought into my 2017 TBR, and 2016 was the first year I actually did a formal TBR, and it worked out so well that I wanted to do the same thing for 2017. As it turned out, for 2017, I wound up with 15 nonfiction and 15 fiction works. That's a complete accident, but it's very balanced. So I'm happy with it. What I can try to do is read read a fiction, then read a nonfiction. To explain a little bit about my TBR, I've heard other people say they don't want to do TBRs because they feel like it's too limiting. I do have wildcard allowances in my TBR in case something just hits me where I can. Where I just don't want to, I want to read that minute. I do have space for 5 of those. I did the same thing in 2016. Ultimately, I did not use that. I actually read through my TBR first, and then I read. Then I just picked books after that, and until just recently, the book I finished just recently, Sister Vegan, was my last book for 2016 because December is a month of rereads for me. So, but anyway, without further ado, let's start with the list because I have 15 nonfiction works to get through. I want to start though with a quote from a foreword, the introduction to one of these works, which I thought was a real cool quote about engaging with books and engaging with reading. The quote is this: "Literature is alive. Books like it when, rather than merely studying them, you engage with them deeply, personally, bringing your entire self to the reading experience, both you and the book expanding to dimensions you'd never have thought possible." That is a quote by Andrew D. Kaufman, and that is from the book Give War and Peace a Chance, which I'll chat about a bit more in a moment. But let's get to the list. This is in no particular order. It's just sort of random order, but the first book on the list is actually stamped from the beginning: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. This book recently won the National Book Award for nonfiction. And I think it's so interesting in the U.S. To think about the U.S. as this country. If it was a science fiction novel, I think it would be extremely interesting to think of, we colonize another planet there that people already lived on, and we subjugate the people who were native to the planet, and then we take the land for ourselves, and then we enslave. A third of our population is enslaved people. I think it was like a third. And then we create a government that is based on Enlightenment principles of freedom and equality. It would sound like that's in a science fiction work. That would sound like, wow, that sounds like it's going to be a really engaging story about these people who did this kind of thing and built this kind of society based on this sort of oppression. But that's ultimately the story of the U.S. So I'm really interested to actually get into this and read a little bit more about the history of racist ideas in the U.S. So the next book on the list is called The Poetics of Space. This is by Gaston Bachelard. This was written originally in 1958. He's a French philosopher, and he studies he wrote this book about the philosophy, I guess, of the interaction between us and space, like our homes, our rooms, our spaces. And so this got really good reviews. It's considered a classic in its field. It might be a challenge for me. I don't know, but sometimes we just have to pick these kind of books that might be a challenge and see where it takes us. So this one's on my list. So the next book on the list is called Weep, Shudder, Die. A Guide to Loving Opera by Robert Levine. I already love opera, but this just caught my attention. I would love, to engage with opera a little bit deeper. If you've seen some of my opera videos, you can tell that I already like it, but I haven't always liked it. So this is relatively only the last couple of years that I've really been able to engage with opera as an art form. And, I really think that now that I do, I really kind of wonder why I didn't get it before and why so many people seem to, whenever I talk with opera about them, they think it's this inaccessible thing, and to me now it's actually not. It's very accessible. So the next book on the list is called Give War and Peace a Chance, Tolstoyan Wisdom for Troubled Times by Andrew D. Kaufman. This is actually the book the foreword that I mentioned, the quote at the beginning of this chat. It comes from this book, and I love this cover because this is someone who loves War and Peace. This War and Peace is all tattered, and it's got, stickies and things. So this guy apparently really loves War and Peace and has given it a lot of thought and, relates it to everyday life, and I love this kind of thing. So that's on my list to read this year. Next on my list is Confucius and the World He Created. This is a biography of Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, who's probably the most influential philosopher perhaps of all time, and I know virtually nothing about him, I'm sorry to say. So I'm going to remedy that this year, and I'm going to read this biography of Confucius, and this book is supposed to put him in context with how he's still influencing cultures around the world today. So hopefully that will be good. So the next one on my list is it's another biography. It is Pyotr Tchaikovsky. So I chose this biography because I was looking for another biography, and one thing I've discovered about Tchaikovsky over the last year is I've really gotten into listening to his ballets, Swan Lake, The Sleeping Beauty, and The Nutcracker. They're all really good. It's all really good reading music, by the way. Check it out on Spotify if you're interested. But he is an extremely interesting person from the 19th century, and so I decided that I would reach out and get to know him a little bit better this year or next year in 2017. So that's on my list. Next, I have a memoir called Stars Between the Sun and the Moon, One Woman's Life in North Korea and Escape to Freedom by Lucia, Jang. This was recommended by a YouTuber, booktuber, Bree Hill, and this memoir it sounds like she had sort of a harrowing life in North Korea. I don't know a lot about North Korea, so I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about their culture and about her experience. So the next book I have is actually a actual physical print book. I've had this book bought for years and I've never really read it. I've had it for maybe 4 or 5 years, if not longer. It's called After the Ice, A Global Human History, 20,000 BC to 5,000 BC. 20,000 to 5,000 BC by Stephen Mithen. So, I've really wanted to read this for a long time. If you've seen my channel very long, you know that I love deep history. I love really this far, far back, pre-history even. And so I'm sort of interested to know, because this is a global, survey of the Ice Age. I think I'm more familiar with the Ice Age in Europe, and I'm not that familiar with the European experience of the Ice Age, but the Ice Age obviously affected the entire world. So, looking forward to that. So then the next book on the list is called A Most Dangerous Book. Here it is. Tacitus's Germania, From the Roman Empire to the Third Reich by Christopher B. Krebs. I love this kind of thing. Tacitus wrote a book called Germania, which was a book for the Roman audience about these, barbarians, the Germans, Germania they called it, north of, the Roman Empire. And this book has influenced people throughout all time. And, I always find it really super interesting how books these ancient books like this, navigate through time, like the Iliad and Odyssey, which I recently read a book about. And then also I read a book a couple of years ago called The Swerve, which was about a book on the nature of things by Lucia, which really affected science. So I'm really curious about this book too, just because I love this kind of story about how a book winds its way across time and across multiple cultures. So hope that's interesting. And then the next book I have on the list is called On Monsters, An Unnatural History of Our Worst Fears by Stephen T. Asma. So I've had this downloaded as a sample for literally, many years, and it's never made it to a reading, never actually gotten around to reading it, so I decided this was my year. I think it's fascinating about how humans construct, monsters. I think about shows like The Walking Dead. Like, zombies to me are totally unrealistic. They're totally like the most fabricated monster in the world, but yet I still find them terrifying. So I think that's super interesting. I don't know exactly what all we're going to explore in this book, but it looks really good just from the table of contents and just from skimming it. So that's coming up. Then the next book I have on my list is called The Jazz of Physics. So, The Jazz of Physics, The Secret Link Between Music and the Structure of the Universe by Stefan Alexander. So, yeah, if you ever wondered how, John Coltrane, the jazz musician, and Einstein relate to each other, this book is going to explore how. It sounded kind of interesting. It's been a while since I've read this kind of science book, but I am real curious to see the overlay between music and physics, specifically jazz, I guess. The next book on the list is called, At the Existential Cafe, Freedom, Being, and Apricot Cocktails by Sarah Bakewell. So there's the cover of that. This is about, a young couple of 20-somethings, a girl, a young woman, and her 20-something boyfriend are in a bar drinking, in a little cafe drinking their specialty, which is apricot cocktails, and they wind up coming up with a philosophy that changes, the world, existentialism. We're talking here about Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, and there's actually going to be quite a few other philosophers that join them over the course of the development of existentialism. And so Sarah Bakewell actually wrote another book that I read a few years ago called The Good Life, and it was an exploration of Michel de Montaigne's essays about how to live a good life. And so she wrote really engaging. She really brought that was sort of a from the late Middle Ages Renaissance era from France, and she really brought that to life and made it really relevant. So I'm hoping that she can bring the same sort of engagement to this topic. So then the next book I have on my list is called SPQR. Find the cover for that. A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. SPQR means, in Latin, it means Senate Populus K Romanus. I don't know Latin, but it means the Senate and the people of Rome. And so this is kind of a short, popularized general history. It's not a real in-depth history, but I love Roman history. I've read periodically different versions of it and different sort of focusing on different aspects of it. This is supposed to be a sort of a general history, I think, of maybe the Senate. I'm not exactly sure, but I have it down for going to be my Roman book for the year. Other than the Tacitus book about Germania, I guess that's sort of Roman. And then the next book I have on my list is called Vanished Kingdoms, The Rise and Fall of States and Nations. This is Viking. Can you believe this? This is Viking. This is not a cover. This is actually a title page, but this is what they're calling a cover for this electronic edition. I'm going to do a video about major publishers. It seems like the bigger and the more international a publisher is, the less likely they are to put out a good electronic edition. But anyway, poor electronic edition aside, this Norman Davies, the guy who wrote this, he's fascinated by the history that's below the surface. So, there's been a lot of kingdoms and nations and things that have come and gone and disappeared from history and from time. I love this kind of thing because it sort of led us to where we are now. So I love this sort of forgotten history, forgotten cultures, forgotten time. So that's on my list. And then the last book, number 15, is called, let me get the cover up here. Musoni, Rufus, Lectures and Sayings. This is translated by Cynthia King, and it's got a preface by William B. Irvine. So Musoni, Rufus is a Stoic philosopher, Roman Stoic philosopher. I always seem to have one of these going on right now. I'm also doing a chapter-by-chapter chats on Epictetus, which was another Roman scholar. So you'll see videos of the chapters of that periodically from me because I'm working my way through the discourses by Epictetus. Musoni, Rufus was actually Epictetus's teacher. So I've never read his lectures and sayings, so I'm curious to do that this year in 2017. And William Irvine, who actually does the preface for this work, wrote a book called A Guide to the Good Life, The Roman Art of Stoic Joy, that I read about three years ago. And it's sort of what set me off on this sort of Stoic journey. And so he does the preface for this work, so I hope this is a good addition. So, that's my 2017 nonfiction TBR. I've run a little longer than I had hoped, but that's the rundown of what I'm going to read coming up in the next year. So I hope that you will find at least one or two of these interesting. I'll be doing video chats. I'll be doing chats on them as I complete them, of course. So stay tuned. There will be a lot coming in 2017. My 2017 fiction TBR will be out very soon. So stay tuned. Take care. Bye.